Carrie, Carrie, up the hill.
Directed by Kevin Lewis, we are talking Pig Hill, and this is a 2025 horror movie. And what is the story of Pig Hill, I hear you ask? Well, there is a kind of a small rural town in America, and it has this kind of urban legend about these pig people, and they are kind of rumoured to be in this area called Pig Hill. And it has this history where within the last kind of like decade or so, women have gone missing. And, everyone's kind of afraid to go in this kind of Pig Hill area. And the movie focuses on a character called Carrie, who worked in a bookshop and is writing a book about these pig people. And, she has a little bit of a troubled life. She's estranged from her husband. She has an overbearing brother. And she ends up kind of meeting this guy who has kind of moved back to this kind of small town, and they sort of strike up a bit of a friendship, possibly a little bit of a romantic connection. And Carrie actually volunteers at a kind of homeless shelter, and one day this kind of woman at the shelter, who's heavily pregnant, sort of gives birth to what appears to be a deformed baby, and then kills herself, citing the Pig Hill as the kind of the reason. So Carrie now is emboldened to kind of go and investigate. She drags along this kind of new potential love interest to find out what is the mystery about Pig Hill. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's talk about it. Pig Hill. Now, this is an interesting movie because it's, on one hand, a schlocky B movie. On the other hand, it's somewhat of a kind of surreal art house film. So it's kind of this hybrid between the two. A path not all that well trodden, I have to say, with elements of both. What can we say that works in this movie's favour? It certainly has some shocking stuff, from bestiality, incest, graphic kills, rape, all sorts of shenanigans, in sort of fairly kind of graphic detail. Not the most explicit maybe than you've ever seen, but pretty kind of strong stuff, I would say. A lot of it is kind of told. Some of it is shown. Let me just kind of say that. But the themes there are quite graphic, quite disturbing. So there's that. The movie also is deliberately vague about what's actually kind of going on. And there are a few possible scenarios that could be happening. It gives for example, there's legends that go dating back thousands of years of gods, basically mating with human women, creating Nephilim that are kind of, half creature, half human, hence the pig people. It could be this kind of meth dealer called Red, who's the father of this homeless woman that was pregnant. It could be that there is just some sort of masked serial killer, a cult, all sorts of stuff basically kind of going on. Or, it could be half human, half pig people from bestiality. So the movie throws out a number of different options about what it could be. And it keeps that kind of multiple ideas going pretty much until the end of the movie, until obviously it's revealed what's actually happened. So there's some interesting kind of ideas banded around. I will say, I think the acting is actually kind of fairly solid. The characters are well portrayed by the actors, and I think they all do a good job here. The movie has somewhat of an over-stylized production value, but I can appreciate some of the kind of the stylistic choices. We'll talk about it again in the negatives, to be honest with you, but I did appreciate at least some of the kind of the style that this this director is trying to inject into this movie to give it a little bit of kind of flair. Some of the VFX, as I say, there is some kind of like some gore sequences. They are fleeting, they're kind of short-lived. This doesn't really dwell on it, but they are done to a kind of a good standard. And I think that the sheer sort of brutality of some of the kind of the ideas in this movie, as I say, some of it is shown, some of it is more hinted at, but nonetheless, the kind of just the idea of the brutality that potentially what's going on, you know, it makes it sort of quite strong stuff. Maybe not to the extreme kind of horror standards, but certainly on the kind of the stronger ideas. What doesn't work? Okay. So the stylistic choices of this movie, as I say, it straddles the line between a B movie and an art house film, and they're at somewhat odds because it's somewhat of a schlocky, silly movie, but at the same time it has this kind of idea of itself where it's this sort of surreal movie where it has this kind of like all this weird imagery a lot of the time, and I don't know if the two really mesh, because it really isn't kind of like highfalutin sort of art house sort of elevated horror, you know, because it really does feel quite schlocky and B-movie and silly. So I think it's in this weird place. There is a massive over-reliance on like hallucinogenic scenes, flashbacks, obscure imagery, symbolism, and kind of like dream sort of sequences, so much so that you're not quite sure what you're watching, if it's meant to be some sort of vision or if it's actually meant to happen. There are scenes that I'm still not really sure, did that actually happen, or is this kind of some type of drug-infused hallucination? I don't really know. And I don't know if I think the film is trying to be vague, but I think it maybe steps one step too far in that and ends up being just trying to have its cake and eat it too. To have this kind of like mystery, this story about what's actually going on and all this kind of like weird imagery. It happens so much. There's like various different things. Even in shots which are clearly meant to be, I think, like, you know, just normal story-driven scenes that are happening in the real world, the kind of the lighting choices here are like really sort of this kind of overbearing like red light that kind of like this, and these filters that make it seem like a music video, an overuse of kind of like dry ice that makes it again look not real, and like it looks too produced. It looks like there's too much kind of going on. So some of these visual choices I think needed to be toned down to make this movie feel less like a music video, to be quite honest. And have a little bit more tonal consistency, because I just feel it's all over the place. It wants to be an elevated horror, but it really is a B movie, and there are some sillier elements here. When you've watched the movie as a whole, I mean, some of it, like I say, still retains that sort of shock value, but it does seem sort of silly, and you will question, well, what about this? What about that? And I don't know if it particularly holds up under sort of scrutiny, if we're being completely honest. There's also sort of just choices that are odd. For example, we have this love interest called Andy, and he kind of shows up, and I guess he's our male lead. And then at one point, Carrie gets sort of kidnapped, and Andy kind of goes to look for her. And all of it, there's this other guy that's suddenly with him. Well, who's this guy? And it's just, I'm presuming it's just his friend, but have we seen him before? But he's just there, and he's just like, he's talking like we're supposed to know who he is. If you like art house films, but you like the B-movie kind of sillier storylines, maybe you'll kind of like this more than maybe some. But to me, it was, you know, it was a real mix, this movie, because there is some, like I say, there's some strong performances. There is some strong visual sequences, and there are some shocking scenes. But I got to say, I think the story is spotty, and just the over-reliance on kind of like they say these hallucinogenic sequences or flashbacks or just weird imagery, or you know, trying to have this visual kind of flair, just completely like overshadows, I think, this story, and makes this more style than substance. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. I do think there is an audience maybe for this, and some will enjoy it more than others. I do think this is going to be a movie that is somewhat going to be divisive. I think some will not get on with it at all. Others might enjoy some of the kind of the out there ecstatic. But to me, it was some good stuff, but ultimately unsatisfying. I was possibly going to go for a 6, to be honest with you, because what does works well. But just as a film as a whole, I just think there's just too many issues for me, at least. So I've got to go for a 5, but not a terrible movie. Just kind of some, in my opinion at least, some decisions that could have been reworked. 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? Let me know your thoughts.